What's up, everyone? Good morning and welcome to Shaw Local's Bears Insider Podcast. I am Kyle Nabors along with Sean Hammond and Hub Arkush. It is Wednesday morning, April 19th, and we are 8 days away from the draft, and it's really starting to get exciting, guys. We dropped a column on shawlocal.com last night from you looking at really the perfect position that Ryan Poles and the Bears find themselves in here, because with the way these draft boards are setting up, you mentioned in your column that uh, the Bears had probably anywhere from 8 to 10 what they consider blue chip players on their board. Multiple players are probably going to be there for them at number 9, giving Ryan Poles an option of taking that best player available or trading down. All this is to say, Hub, it's like I said, looking really good for the Bears right now.
Yeah, I think they're in a good spot, guys. We're at this point in the draft with 8 days or a week to go to the first round. Everybody is still adjusting their boards. We're all making phone calls and adjusting our boards. I redid my top 30 yesterday for that column, and right now I've got them as what I believe the 30 best prospects, 1 through 30. It's not a mock draft, and all 32 teams had different boards. So. What we know about Ryan Poles, what he told us early on, I think at the combine, is that he's got them graded in 5 different colors. He starts with his blue grades, and those are the guys that he thinks have a chance to be stars. And he wants to get one of those guys in the first round. He'd like to get 5 of them, but obviously he won't. And so the key is, you got to sort out where everybody else has got their lists. But sitting at 9, if he's got 8, 9, or 10, with all these teams having different boards, there's going to be 14 or 15 guys to pick from. And so they do have room to trade down a bit, not far. They can't trade down to 25. You can if you get lucky. But based on their board, they could easily trade down to maybe worst case 15 or 16 and still get a blue player, still get that guy who's going to, go to Pro Bowls every year if they pick right. And, there are draft boards available. If you've been doing this for a while, you get to know this a little bit. You can sort out what teams are looking for in trades, what fair value is. I can tell you right now that if a team trades the 9th pick in the draft, this is what they can expect to get based on a number of points given to each pick, or each of the, 250 picks or whatever. And if the Bears were to trade down no further than 15 or 16, they could probably add another mid-second and another mid-third round pick. That's kind of the value. And, if you're still picking at 15 and you get a blue player and you get another 2 and another 3, Sean, that puts you in a pretty good place.
Yeah, certainly. I think that would be a scenario that really appeals to Ryan Poles. He's talked about how adding future value or even if it's not a first round pick next year, maybe it's another second round pick this year or whatever the case may be. I mean, he's going to want to keep adding draft value, and that's how he wants to build this team. And if he has an opportunity to do that, I think he's going to think long and hard about that. I'm curious, Hub, from your perspective, you're mentioning, the 15, 16 range. Who are some of the teams who you could realistically see looking to trade up potentially for that number 9 pick?
Well, now we're back to the guessing game again.
Yeah.
And it's not. I haven't really even focused much on trying to identify teams because I don't know what their lists look like. It's got to be another team that has a situation like we just said with the Bears and with Poles. If they've got a blue player, they may not call them blue players, but, then you get to, 14, 15, 16, the teams that are picking there. One team that really jumps out at me is the New England Patriots because they're in that middle round and they've been active in prior years. And I think that they probably evaluate better than most teams. So that's one that I would keep an eye on. But really, as we watch this develop the next couple of days, what happens is that, you keep making phone calls, you keep talking to teams. These boards start to look more similar as we get closer to day one. And once we've got, a lot of teams with the same grades, I think then you get a better sense of who the better trade teams are. The one thing that you're still looking for, Will Levis, I think is absolutely going to go past 9 or 10. And I don't think any of the other quarterbacks do. But if you look at the list of the teams, there's really 10 to 12 teams that might like to get quarterbacks. And so, I think he becomes the key. The further he drops, is where you get a better sense of who else might be dropping, who else might be going too soon. And then you can look at some teams and what they might want and what might be more likely to make another trade.
A lot to unpack here, a lot to get to just from this opening kind of conversation, guys. I'll throw two more teams out there. Yeah, New England at number 14 seems like a logical fit. You bring up Will Levis, Washington sitting down there at number 16. That's a team, if they decide they want to come up and get a quarterback at 9, that's a team that could be there. And then 17 is Pittsburgh. And they're very clearly in the cornerback market. If Devon Witherspoon or Christian Gonzalez are still on the board at 9, I could see that being a move that Pittsburgh would be willing to make, guys. But the way I set up the YouTube, when I was getting ready for this stream yesterday, kind of the first point for where the Bears, or the first action point for the Bears, is probably going to be at 9, because you look at offensive and defensive line, right? And let's assume the top 3 defensive linemen are off the board in Tyree Wilson, Jalen Carter, and Will Anderson. Now, not quite as sure on Jalen Carter because of the off-field stuff, but it's starting to look more and more like that is going to take place. At that point, you're looking at probably the offensive linemen, right? Because it does look like all of them are going to be on the board. Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson, who am I? I'm forgetting another name there, a third name.
Broderick Jones.
Broderick Jones. Yeah. Darnell Wright could come into that. Maybe I don't think he's going number 9, but that's where I think you get into that first conversation. If you're Ryan Poles, is if those top 3 defenders are off the board, do you feel strongly enough for those guys at number 9 to take an offensive lineman? Now, of course, you need a team that wants to come up and take number 9 from you. That's, a given here. But if those top 3 guys are defenders off the board, Hub, do you think that is more of a reason to trade back?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I keep going back to these blue players. I mean, it depends on how many of those guys are available, and how far do you think that they might fall? I don't think, I shouldn't say I don't think. I don't know, how Ryan Poles is going to approach this, but if you're approaching the draft as to getting guys at positions that you need the most, you're probably going to fail. You've got to stay with best available players. And so that's why I stick with these blue rankings. I also, guys, and I know I'm, in the minority with you two, let alone who knows how many other draft experts out there. I just don't think the Bears' need on offensive line is as great as people make it out to be. And quite frankly, I'm going to be disappointed if they stay at 9 and take a tackle. I just don't, I don't think that's going to be the best player, and I don't think it's going to be their greatest need. And that's where, that's 2 ways to miss in the draft. But that's just my opinion. I'm just one guy, and last I know, I haven't been running an NFL team in a few years, or ever for that matter. So, this is where I try to be really careful with our viewers, with our readers, with our listeners, in reminding them we do a lot of homework on this. I probably, only because I've been doing it for so long, have more sources than a lot of folks. And I do get to talk to a lot of teams. There are a lot of teams I can trust. But at the end of the day, they're not giving me their deepest secrets either. So we don't know what these boards look like, other than we're looking at other draft experts, and that's the key. Who are the Bears in love with? I mean, to me, there is no question in my mind, from the people I've talked to, the 2 best football players in this draft are Bijan Robinson and Jalen Carter. And we don't know where either one of them is going to go because of the way teams have devalued running backs and how reluctant they are to take a running back, top 5, it's not going to happen. Top 10, it may not happen. And then with Carter, there's just so many unanswered questions. But guys, we go back to just prior to the championship game, and then the accident, I think it was the day after the championship game or 2 days after the championship game, and everything that's happened since. There's just so much we still don't know. Where Carter really hurt himself was not just in what happened with the car accident, but the way he's behaved since, showing up at the combine overweight, not being in the best shape at some of his pro days. I mean, these are things that teams really should be very concerned about. Now, to turn it around, if the Bears have a chance to take Jalen Carter at number 9, which also happens to be, to me, a much greater need than the offensive line, and I'm more worried about edge rushers, and he's not a pure edge rusher, but he can rush the passer. And then we've got to look at what happened with Ryan Poles' free agency last year and some of the guys he signed and the problems that they had. He's going to be very reluctant to take a chance, but they had him in town. They've had a chance to meet with him. I don't think I added it to the column, but I meant to. He's not a bad kid. I mean, this is not a guy who has a bad track record going back prior to the car accident, and so I just don't know how he has, come out in his visits. But boy, that's too good a football player to pass at number 9 if he's okay, mentally and maturity. Sean?
I have a hard, I don't know. I have a hard time putting the way I would feel about it aside versus the way maybe an NFL GM would feel about it, because we know these guys just want to win. And so somebody's going to draft Jalen Carter at some point. They are much, they're privy to these conversations with Carter on these visits. Curious choice not to visit with teams below number 10. I don't know. Hub, did you hear that Jalen Carter's not visiting with any of those other teams?
Yeah, but that's his agent's choice. And I've known his agent for a long time, and that's typically his style, I personally think it's really dumb. Why wouldn't you visit? Why wouldn't you visit with every team?
Job interviews. Yeah.
I mean, teams can trade up. It's just that's just him trying to make a public. He's trying to make Carter more popular. Guys, I think the other thing that I was thinking about last night with Carter is that he's not even accused of being a bad guy. He may just be immature. He may just be growing up. I mean, there was no track record prior to the car accident of trouble with Jalen Carter. And he has not ever been accused of causing the accident or causing people to die or anything like that. And not being in shape, not working out enough. These are maturity issues, and people grow up. And this is what, teams are evaluating with every player on the board, not just with Jalen Carter. And so, yes, because of who he is, there's going to be a bigger concern. And because he is going to be taken in the top 10, maybe even in the top 5, you want to be really careful with that pick. But I do think we have to be careful with this assumption that Jalen Carter is a problem, that he's a bad guy. I've never met him. I don't know that. And I think most teams would tell you the same thing. That's why they're anxious to visit with him. But he is the key. In many respects, he and quarterbacks number 3 and 4 are the trick to the first 10 picks. They're the ones that are going to decide where other players go based on where they go.
So, Hub, with your experience, sorry, Sean, I got to ask this question, though. You are right. We shouldn't assume that Jalen Carter is a bad guy. I like, that is a big mistake. I don't want to downplay what happened. That's not what I'm trying to do. But what I think you're trying to get at, Hub, and the question I have for you is, how deep do NFL teams, like if they have a situation such as this where they're questioning a player's character, like how deep will they go into their research to find out, was this an isolated incident, or was this just kind of something that was flying under the radar, where maybe there are, obviously not this severe, but more instances where they're red flags?
They're going to go knee deep. They better, because again, you don't want, if he doesn't become a great player because he's not a good guy, this is something you have to live with. It could cost a guy a job. It's not that bad, but I mean, depends on who takes him. But yes, every team is going to go as deep as they possibly can. And this is the hard part of evaluating 20, 21, 22-year-olds. Again, this is everybody. This is not just Jalen Carter. And it's what is so unique about the draft. And, that's why when I read about kids, I think the best tackle is Paris Johnson. I think, Skoronski is a close number 2. Maybe they're even tied. My only concern with Skoronski is that I think he's more of a guard than a tackle, and I don't think guards are as valuable as tackles, or let me rephrase that, is hard to find. But Paris Johnson tests as one of the most impressive young men in this draft. That's really hard for me to say about an Ohio State guy. But, his work at school, the kind of student he is, how smart he is, his leadership qualities. These are things that you're looking very strong for. And, we just don't know really about any of these players other than the few conversations we got to have with each of them or some of them at the combine. but these teams do. That's why they're doing this much work. And so what I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. One thing that does bother me about Carter is I don't even like the way he's still behaving. I mean, I was reading, last night, his agent, is putting stuff everywhere. And he did an interview with one of the big, websites yesterday and made some comments about his approach to how serious his issue is. And he made it sound like he knows it's an issue, but he doesn't think it's that big a deal. It's a big deal, son. It's something that you should be going the opposite direction on. You should be doing everything you can to convince people you understand how serious the concerns about you are and why you shouldn't be concerned. That's not the way he's behaving right now, and it's not a good look. And so that's why I think people are getting more confused about him rather than more settled on him.
I personally think there's too many concerns, and I hear what you're saying, Hub, when you say, guys, these are 21, 22-year-old athletes. They might not be mature yet. Guys still have some growing up to do. But at the same time, I mean, you draft a guy, he's on your team the next day. You don't have time to wait for him to mature necessarily. And what he signs his contract, he's got some money in his pocket too. And I understand giving people a chance, but I would much prefer to take a guy who shows me the maturity now than a guy who you have questions about that maturity.
So Kyle, let me just add one more thing to that, because I completely agree with Sean. But the other factor is that gets balanced along with weighing the kind of football player he is.
Right. Yeah.
He clearly was the number one player in the draft until that car accident happened. I don't think there was any question about that. Doesn't mean a quarterback or two wouldn't have gotten taken first, but everybody had him number one on their list. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. He's a monster against the run. He rushes the passer. The way he plays the game, is want to. Those tests have all been passed, and so if you're going to give up on that part, you better be fairly concerned that there are issues that are going to haunt him, at least for his first couple of years, if not throughout his career.
Before the Bears traded the number one pick, and before that happened, let's go back to, November, December, when it was looking like Jalen Carter was going to be the first, second, or third pick in the draft, and that the Bears were going to be in one of those spots. I think most Bears fans would have been very, very happy to land Jalen Carter. The opportunity to get him at number 9, the talent is still there. It's just, it's going to be a really hard thing to figure out. Definitely interested to find out how that happens, unfolds on draft day. But we're already about 18 minutes in and really haven't even got into the proper yet. This is a good conversation. Going to pull up here in a minute. Hubs, well, he did his top 30. I'm going to share the top 20 here, but make sure you go to shawlocal.com to see Hubs' full top 30 that he had in his latest column, talking about whether the Bears should trade, the opportunity to trade down there in the first round. Make sure you follow us on Twitter as well, at Kyle Nabors, at Hub_Arkush, at Sean_Hammond. And guys, we got a lot of comments already. You're going to try and get to them. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can give us drop a comment on the side there. We will try and get to them. A lot, as I said, already coming in. If you are watching,
I'm going to throw Hub's column in the chat too, if guys want to hit the link.
Yeah. And of course, if you are watching on YouTube, do us a favor, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the page, helps people find the show, helps grow the channel. And if you're watching this later, leave a comment. We do check those. I try and go through those every week. So appreciate the feedback there. Now, I'm going to go ahead here and throw this up on the screen. I did this right before, so this isn't professionally done. So if you're listening to this in the podcast format, hopefully we make this easy enough to follow. But this was Hub's top 20 here. I'm throwing that on the screen now. As you were saying, Bijan Robertson and Will Anderson, you're 1 and 2, Hub. You have Tyree Wilson at number 3, Jalen Carter down there at number 6. I guess first off, you're looking at this top 10. You have Paris Johnson there. That's kind of where we were at, that we were talking about earlier about the trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if Paris Johnson is on the board at number 9, is he the type of prospect where you're saying offensive line you don't believe is the top priority, but as the top offensive tackle, a guy that you do feel pretty confident is going to end up at a tackle position, unlike Skoronski. Do the Bears have to take Johnson in that spot, or are they trading down, or would you prefer them to trade down?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me be real clear with everybody on this. Guys, this is not a mock draft. I have talked to my sources with 27 of the 32 teams. I've taken their information, I've balanced it all out, and I've adjusted this list, probably 100 times. This is how a lot of teams are rating these players 1 through 30 as far as the kind of football players they are. Not this goes to Ryan Poles, blues and golds and everything else. And so that's what we're talking about here. I would be very happy with Paris Johnson at number 9 if they take him, because I like everything I've seen about the kid. I also know that the Bears got a young man in the 5th round last year who I think is going to be their starting left tackle for the next 8-9 years. I really like him, and it's one of the reasons that I don't understand why everybody is so focused on this Bears offensive line thing. They also committed in free agency to the guard position, and so, as I look at not only the quality of these talents, but the positions they play, if I only get to pick one other, the Bears have so much greater of a need at edge rusher than they do on the offensive line that's why, as I look at where these players fall on the board, I start evaluating these picks. And again, guys, I'm not copping out on you. I'm just telling you the truth. We don't know who Ryan Poles' 8 blue players are, or maybe he's gone to 9 now, or maybe he's gone down to 7. But it's quite possible that 1 or 2 of them are number 17 on some other team's lists, and so I guess it's what makes this fun, but it's why I'm always trying to be careful and not pretending with anybody that I know who every team is going to pick, with every pick in these rounds. The Bears cannot lose by drafting at 9 if they get one of their blue players, and they cannot lose by trading down if some of their blue players are still available. I think the key is to understand there's only so far down you can trade. You go down to 20, 25, you're going to get more for that trade, but you're also going to be picking a player that's a much bigger question mark than what you're going to take if you only go down to 14, 15, 16, something like that.
And I think it kind of goes back to, Kyle, what you were saying with that scenario where if those top 3 defensive linemen are gone, that's when it's really important, and it really comes down to the grades on say like a Nolan Smith out of Georgia or a Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa. Do the Bears see those guys as potentially a blue player? Could they see themselves taking either of those guys with that number 9 pick? And especially, those 2 in particular. Nolan Smith missed a lot of time last year with injury. Lucas Van Ness is a little bit of an unknown, hasn't played as much football as maybe some of the other guys on the list. And so your evaluations on those guys are gonna be really, really important in determining, whether you want to take maybe the 4th best defensive lineman off the board, or whether you want to go with an offensive tackle or somebody else.
It's going to be fun on draft night if the Bears stick at number 9 there, and they do make a pick like Nolan Smith or Peter Skoronski or Lucas Van Ness, guys that don't perfectly project, guys that are good prospects. Don't get me wrong, right? But like, we don't know. You know what? I feel pretty good about Nolan Smith. I'll say that. I feel less confident in Peter Skoronski and Lucas Van Ness. But like, there are some names that I feel like, Paris Johnson. I feel like most Bears fans, you can say, yeah, that's a blue chip player. That's a good pick, right? But that's it's going to be interesting where the Bears are at in that spot, because you're going to have a lot of draft. You're going to get a lot of people on the sidelines if you get a pick like Lucas Van Ness, right? That I don't think it's a stretch at number 9, because I do think there's a lot of high upside there, but it's such an unknown that do you guys, I guess I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase this here. You know what I'm saying though? Like, do you need, or how confident do you guys feel in Ryan Poles in this front office evaluation? I guess is where I'm going with this here. Like, are you willing to take a chance on an unknown like Lucas Van Ness, or do you feel that they have to have a more sure thing?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I am sure how to answer it, because I know I am sure what you're asking. I'm just not sure how to say it, is what I should have said.
I had trouble saying it myself. So,
this is not a 1-year rebuild. The Bears are not going to the Super Bowl in 2023. They're probably not going to the playoffs in 2023. This is at least 2 years and maybe even 3. You're not going to get it all right. So anybody who's focused on we've got 10 picks and we get 10 starters, not we, the Bears, of course, is just kidding themselves. Guys, I think that Lucas Van Ness, in many respects, not because he's a local kid, but because of the way his evaluation looks, is the most interesting player in this first round. And it's not because he's a local kid. You watch tape, and he does some things that other edge rushers or defensive linemen can't do. As an athlete, with his ability, he is a clear first round, top 10, top 15 pick, except for one thing. In 3 years at Iowa, he was never a starter. And Iowa, it ain't Michigan and it ain't Ohio State. And so that even further devalues a little bit. Why? Why is a kid who shows that type of physical ability on the field not on the field for every play? Why is he not the center of your defense? It doesn't mean he's not going to be a great pro, but it's another one of these questions that I just can't get my arms around. I can't explain it.
I think that's more of just an Iowa thing in terms of they wanted to start the seniors, and there were a couple seniors on that defensive line in front of him. I mean, you ask, I spoke with one of his defensive line coaches, and he said, yeah, if we need, in those crunch times, Lucas Van Ness was going to be on the field. And so I don't have the snap numbers in front of me, but I would imagine he was just as, had just as many, if not more snaps than some of those seniors who were technically the starters. I wouldn't really read a whole lot into that. I mean, I think he's still was their best defensive lineman, their best edge rusher, whether he was starting or not.
This is a good time to plug Sean's piece. We have a really good feature up on Lucas Van Ness that you can find on shawlocal.com. Sean, if you want to find the link for that and drop that into the chat.
Yeah, I can drop that in there.
So, a little insight from Sean's story that was interesting was that Lucas Van Ness, wasn't your traditional playing football growing up. He was a hockey player. Even into high school, I think, Sean, you had a link to one of his tweets embedded in the story of a very large Lucas Van Ness checking someone into the boards, and it was pretty hilarious to see the clip. But in that story, you mentioned, or you talked with his high school coach, and Lucas Van Ness played with the freshman team. He played with the sophomore team. He very much has moved up the ranks, not as this kid that was a huge, come into high school by his sophomore year. Oh yeah, he's going to be an NFL player. He's developed all the way throughout and continued that development at Iowa. And while that's a good sign that he's a special talent, he's got the size, that also means the very, very much an unknown for an NFL team still.
Yeah, his coach called it the traditional route. Freshman team as a freshman, and actually he was a tight end that freshman year. Sophomore team as a sophomore, didn't play a snap of varsity football until his junior year. Didn't have any of those Big Ten offers until the summer before his senior year, which these days for a guy who winds up being a first round draft pick, that's pretty rare. I mean, those guys are usually getting offers when they're sophomores and juniors. It was really fun kind of diving into Lucas Van Ness, and I encourage you guys to go read the story. There's a lot of good nuggets in there. And, I think going back to I can't remember if it was you, Kyle, or you, Hub, who said it, but, Ryan Poles is looking at this as a multi-year rebuild. And so I'm starting to wrap my head around the fact that they could go for a guy like a Lucas Van Ness who maybe is going to need a little time to work at his game and continue to improve, because he only played 27 games in college. And as Hub said, didn't actually technically start a game. He's going to need a little time, but the Bears, this is a long-term rebuild. They're trying to find good football players, not just for this season, but for the next couple of years. And if Lucas Van Ness, if they see that potential in him, I could totally see them taking him at number 9.
I mean, there are teams that have him that high on their board. I want to be as clear as I can. I have nothing negative to say about Lucas Van Ness as a football player or as a prospect. Sean has done a great job evaluating it for you and with the column. What I will say, though, is that if that is how Iowa runs their football program, then that's why they will never be Michigan or Ohio State. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, but if that's, I mean, it's I guess nice for the kids who get to be seniors but never get to be NFL players. But it's just kind of goofy. Anyway, more to the point.
It's an old school way of thinking. I mean,
yeah.
Well, look at their offense year in and year out. I'm pretty sure they're stuck in the 1970s.
Yeah, they got some issues there.
Well, again, I'm not. It happens to be a great school, and I'm not here to be negative about Iowa. Just about the way they run their football program. I don't think Van Ness is going to go in the first round. I don't think there's any question about that. I would be surprised if he goes any higher than 14, 15, 16, and he could even drop a little bit more because of those questions. But he has a chance to be a great NFL player. And the other thing that I think I mentioned in my column yesterday, I've probably mentioned it a few times, Richard Dent was drafted in the 8th round, guys. And nobody is ever going to take away his permanent spot in the Hall of Fame. And you have to remember that. And, I think what interests me about Ryan Poles is obviously, he didn't accomplish a whole lot in free agency last year, but his first draft without a first round pick, he did pretty well. He found himself some good players, and it gives me some confidence with 10 picks about what he can do this year. But you always have to be drafting value. There's no point in taking a player at number 9 who may still be there in the 2nd or 3rd round. There's no point in taking a player in the 3rd round who may still be there in the 5th round. That is, in many respects, the key to what these general managers are doing. And, Ryan Poles, again, we've only got one draft to look at. I think the first one looks pretty good right now. And, if he can do that well this year with these 10 picks and the 4 picks in the first 3 rounds, Bears fans should feel good about that.
Trying to decide how I want to go here. If I want to dive into, how about we dive into some of the questions and comments here? We're getting a lot of them. See if I can go. Mark had mentioned this earlier. Mark has it checking in with us. Said also Van Ness beat Paris Johnson and Peter Skoronski when Iowa played them. I think he is a good player. Yeah, Mark, Sean, Hub, I think you both kind of already said this, but Van Ness definitely has some plays on tape against really good Big Ten talent that make you sit up and go, ooh, like that could be a thing.
And at the combine, Skoronski even said during his media session that, Lucas Van Ness was had one of the best bull rushes he's ever had to play against. And he said something to the effect of, that's how I imagine NFL pass rushers are attacking out there on the field. And so, that's pretty high praise coming from a guy who's also very likely to be a first round pick here.
Yeah, I'm not knocking your comment, but I'd be pretty careful about saying he beat Paris Johnson. Paris Johnson didn't allow a single sack all last year. So, I'm not sure how he beat him, but he played very well against him, I guess is where we're going with that. And that's because he fits there. That's because all 3 of those guys are going to be top 15, top 16 picks, and that's where they are on the board right now. So, you're absolutely correct about that. Listen, guys, unless they take somebody who's not on my top 30 list at number 9, I'm not going to have a problem with anybody they take in the first round. You can't do that until a year or 2 from now. But Lucas Van Ness, to me, is just a really fascinating evaluation because of, what the school's tendencies did to him with not allowing him to be a starter.
We're focusing a lot on the fact that the Bears on that number 9 pick, and understandably so. But, it is one of 10 picks. The Bears are going to have 2 late picks in the 2nd round and then the first pick of the 3rd round. So, a chance to get some frontline starters, or some quality talent there in that 2nd and 3rd round window. But let's hit on that rebuild for a little bit, because that's kind of one thing that's sticking in the back of my mind here when we're talking about that number 9 pick, because, they did a pretty good job of working on the linebacking group here in free agency. I think we all 3 agree that the secondary is in pretty solid shape. Could get better at cornerback still, definitely needs some depth there. But they don't really have a defensive line. And they added some in the offseason, but certainly edge rushers a need there. But the other thing we got to figure out here, and we've talked about, or Hub, you've written about extensively, is you got to find out exactly what you have in Justin Fields this year. It is about figuring that out. And you look at what Jalen Hurts just got, and that just kind of, again, it puts the emphasis on needing to know what Justin Fields is this year. And how, when starting at that number 9 pick, how does that have to kind of fit into Ryan Poles' his board, how he approaches that pick?
I think there is some consensus among both. Well, I know there is among the teams I'm talking to and among the quote draft experts that the Bears are committed to finding ways to help Justin Fields improve this year, to make him better with other players that they add. There's no question about that. And I keep coming back to, I don't think they're that bad on the offensive line. I think they can get better. There's no question about that, and they need to get better. But how do they improve Justin Fields? Well, they addressed wide receiver with the draft trade. You've got a number 1 wide receiver now. You may very well have had a number 1 or 2 all along in Claypool if he stays healthy and develops this year. I like Cole Kmet at tight end. You could use another one. This is where my love affair with Bijan Robinson comes from. I think that the most improvement to your offense would be by drafting the best, not offensive line, but offensive player, and take the running back. Don't be shy. Take Bijan Robinson, and I think that he is going to be the rookie of the year. He is going to improve your offense and Justin Fields so much by doing what he did in 3 seasons at Texas. I'm not saying they're going to do it. I don't think they are. All these teams seem to agree you can't take a running back that high. I don't know why, but my point is, if you're really focused on how do we make Justin Fields a better quarterback, get him the best running back in the NFL. That's the most you could do with this first-round pick to make him a better quarterback.
Kyle, if the Bears somehow wind up with Bijan Robinson, we are never going to hear the end of it from Hub.
You're never going to hear the end of it from me, because while I don't think it's going to happen, and I disagree with taking a running back at number 9 in the modern day NFL, if it did happen, I would absolutely be fist pumping. Not because I'm like, oh, I'm so excited the Bears got, but because, like, as a football fan, as someone who's going to have to watch the Bears 17 times next year, like Justin Fields, Bijan Robinson, that receiving core, that's a lot of fun, because like Bijan Robinson, again, I don't think any running back at this point is going number 9, but like there is the upside there where you're talking about a game-changing running back. There are very few in the NFL right now, and he has the potential to be among the most elite. I mean, he is on par with Saquon coming out of Penn State. He's that level of good.
He's really the only running back in this draft with a clear first-round grade. Forget whether you have him at 1 or 7 or 13. He is unanimous as the running back in this draft. And you just got to decide, this devaluation of the position isn't about that running backs aren't important. It's about you can get them in the 2nd, 3rd, 6th round. I mean, look at where the Bears got. I'm forgetting the kid's name. I apologize. But the running back who led the NFL in average yards per carry last year.
Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, yep. Khalil Herbert. I mean, they got him in the 3rd round. And by the way, he is still developing. Now, he unfortunately needs a lot of work with his blocking and receiving. And that's why I would go for another running back.
They got him even lower than that, Hub. I think he was a 5th-round pick.
Did they have 2 5th-round picks? Oh, no, it wasn't last year. Was it 2 years ago or last year?
2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, the point is you can get them all over the place. And
6th round even. Even I'm wrong. He was a 6th-round pick.
Well, wherever they got him, I like having running backs who lead the league in average yards per carry. That's a big deal. But Robinson is just the complete package. You can build an offense around him, and that certainly is going to make life easier for your quarterback. And that's where my love affair with him is. That and the fact that my hero has always been Walter Payton, and I don't want to put too much pressure on the kid, but size-wise, style-wise, the way he plays the game, the way he runs the football, that's who I see, and I just don't think you pass a player like that, especially at number 9. But but let me just. Yeah. I do agree with Kyle, though. I don't think the Bears are going to do it. I'm not making that prediction because there is this devaluation of the position is a big deal in the league right now. I'm sorry, Sean.
I was just going to say that I look at the Bears depth chart right now. I look at that roster and I see a big gaping hole at right tackle, and I don't know. If they don't find a starter in this draft, I don't know who's going to start for you at that position. Are you going to go with Larry Borum again? You're going to try Alex Leatherwood? I don't think you're confident in either of those guys at the right tackle spot. And sure, you could draft a left tackle and throw Braxton over the right side or whatever, but they need to find a tackle. And I think, I would be okay with them not drafting a tackle with that number 9 spot, but you better find one in the second round. You better find one pretty high.
Yeah, I agree. I would be really surprised if one of those top 4 picks are not an offensive tackle. I want to throw this in. I want to get into that tackle talk, the offensive line talk a little bit more, but I'm going to throw this up for Mike Gibson first, who said the problem with running backs is they aren't getting second contract from the teams that drafted them. When you're drafting a player that are this high, you want a guy that will be there 10 years, not 5. That is definitely true. I mean, you're seeing these guys get franchise tagged for the most part when you're looking at these running backs. The one thing I'll say about that, and this is where the Hub and Sean were talking about, it all depends on where the Bears feel they are in this rebuild. If they still feel this is going to be a couple of years, then yeah, I don't think would be a good use of Bijan Robinson. I think a team drafting right behind the Bears in Philadelphia would make a lot more sense. A team that is ready to win right now that could take a piece like Bijan Robinson. But going back to the offensive line,
it's the cost of those second contracts too. I mean, you're talking about running back position where guys tend to fall off a cliff after age 27, or at least they start that downward trend. And that's when you're paying big money on those second contracts. And that's why you're seeing so many of these guys not sign with the teams who drafted them.
Yeah, Mike, it's a reasonable point, but I would turn it around and say there's no rule against giving a guy a second contract. There's no reason you can't re-sign him if you think he's worth it, no matter what the price is. And if you are drafting players in this draft based on concerns about what's going to happen in 5 years, you're making a mistake. You make a fair point about what's happening with these second contracts, but I don't think it's a reason at all not to draft a player.
So, not looking 5 years down the road, but let's look a year down the road from now. And we talk, or Hub, you say this is still a multiple year rebuild, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at the offensive line, and I do think that they are better than people think going into this season, but long term, Cody Whitehair is 31 years old, I believe now, and likely to be a cap casualty after this season. You don't know what you have at right tackle. Tevin Jenkins, while he played really well, is having trouble staying on the field consistently. So while this season, I don't feel terrible about where they are, I do think the offensive line is going to be something that they have to focus on in the relatively short term, the next 2 to 3 year window. So if you do believe it is still a multiple year rebuild, I think that does give a more validity to taking an offensive lineman at 9.
I think you're absolutely right. I agree with Sean. I'm concerned about right tackle. I also think DeJuan Jones of Ohio State is going to be available when the Bears pick in the second round. And I think he may be the best right tackle in this draft. I mean, if I've got a guy who is 6'8", 350 pounds, and nasty as they come, that's a player I've been watching for the last, month and a half who I'm really interested in. And, I hate to be redundant, guys, but I keep saying the same thing. We all know this. There are different positions that do better in later high, middle, and late round picks. You can find offensive linemen anywhere in the draft. I haven't done this, so I'll take a chance here. But anybody who has time to waste and wants to, go look at the offensive linemen in the last 3 Pro Bowls and see where they were drafted and find out how few of them were first round picks and where you can get these guys. And don't forget that the Bears I mean, Poles, he committed, what, $35 million? I think he feels like he fixed the guard position on one side in free agency, and I don't know why, after he is on the all rookie team and started every game at left tackle, everybody is so anxious to go get another left tackle. I know it's to move him to the right side, but he's better built for the left side. He's not better built for the right side. So, I just, there's nothing wrong with taking a tackle at number 9. It's just, I don't think it's going to be the best player. And I don't think the only way you take less than the best player with a pick is if you're going need. And I just don't think the need is quite that great in the first round.
Sam Rush checking in here. I'll throw a couple more names. You said DeJuan Jones, Sam Rush saying Jalen Duncan or Anton Harrison will be our offensive tackle. 2 names definitely, Sean, that I know you've mentioned when you were doing your rankings at the tackle position.
Yeah, Anton Harrison from Oklahoma is a big dude. He has some good experience. He's probably a guy that you're going to have to take in the second round at the latest. I mean, I don't know that he's going to necessarily slip past day 2. Might not even last to the third round. I would feel good about that if you're looking for a starter right now. I think Jalen Duncan is less of a sure thing as a starter. He's a guy that has some upside, but there's also a few more questions about him in terms of just what exactly is he going to be long term.
Guys, I think another thing to focus on with offensive linemen is that there really is no position at which coaching is more important. Every one of these offensive linemen that gets drafted, every single one of them is going to be at least 6'2" or 6'3", probably bigger. They're going to be at least 300 pounds, probably. But there may be the spot 295, but they're all going to be the same size or bigger. And a lot of them aren't going to be great athletes. Offensive linemen aren't necessarily great athletes. This is about what the coaching staff does with them and what they see in the abilities that they have and their ability to develop them. And that's why you get so many in the middle or later rounds. And that's why I just think it's a different pick. You look at these draft lists, and offensive tackle is arguably the best or one of the top 3 positions in this draft. There are all these great prospects. I'm more interested in the ones who aren't in the top 4, top 5 on the list, but who have the size and some athletic ability and who can be taught, because those guys, are much easier to get.
This all kind of comes back to where we started. Just hearing these arguments and going through this, man, if there was a way, it just seems to me, you look at the Bears, while they've improved a lot this offseason, I've been really happy with the way Ryan Poles has approached it. They need to get better, really, across the board. They got to get deeper. Being able to trade down, just an add, as Hub, you said in your column last night, being able to add another second and third round pick with what is looking to be a pretty deep draft. Like, I start thinking, obviously we look at edge rusher and offensive line. We spent a lot of our time talking about that. In past episodes, we've talked about the need to get deeper at cornerback. Wide receiver, while the DJ Moore trade is exciting, you don't know what Chase Claypool is. You have a feeling what Darnell Mooney is, but you're going to have to pay one or both of those guys after this coming season. There's a lot of wide receivers I like in this draft, particularly that are going to be available in that second round time period. It's just everything lines up. If they could move down, as you said, Hub, in that draft, in that column to 14, 15, 16, it would just, that to me, that's the absolute best play.
Quentin Johnson, I mean, I like him almost as much as I like Bijan Robinson. And, I would say the slight majority of lists do have him as the number 1 wide receiver. But I know there's a lot of lists that have him as the 3rd or 4th wide receiver. So that's a classic example of a kid who we don't know how far he's going to drop, but he could very well be there at 14, 15, 16, 17. And there's nothing wrong with taking him there as that kind of talent. You're talking about a guy, can't speak English. Mm-hmm. Talking about a guy at 6'4", 240 pounds who runs a 4.45 40. And his specialty at Texas Christian has been big plays, and you put him with the group you've already got. Again, the best ways to improve Justin Fields, I don't believe, are on the offensive line. I think wide receiver would help more, not quite as much, only because I'm a little higher on Bijan Robinson, but get him a running back, get him another quarterback, get him the tools he needs to perform the way you want him to.
Hub, you've been really high on Quentin Johnston, all off season, really. And I'm curious what puts him over the top for you as compared to a Jordan Addison or a Jackson Smith and Jigba or Zay Flowers. Why is it the size? Is it like you said, the big plays? What puts him over the top when you look at these top 4 or 5 receivers?
Mainly it's because he beat Michigan when I thought they were going to win the national championship. But
can't get it out of his mind.
Yeah, no, he's a special athlete who has developed the production to justify the pick. I mean, he has been a big play waiting to happen in college football. He has the size. I haven't heard any negatives about him. Well, I have one negative, and that's why some teams aren't sure, is he does drop a lot of balls, or not a lot, but too many. And that is a concern because some guys that have that problem and it never gets better. But that is the negative on him, but I love size at wide receiver because, it is probably the greatest asset to have against the top cornerbacks. And there are very few corners big enough, to play man-to-man with a guy Johnson's size. And so that's a big part of it too. I just think he's a really good football player. And I don't, it's funny because these two guys that I love the most probably have the least chance of becoming Bears, which is what I would like to see happen. And again, I want to keep reminding everybody, I don't think these things are going to happen. I just wish they would. But I think Quentin Johnston is going to be a very special wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if the Bears went that way in the first round. But yeah, I mean, that would certainly be an exciting addition. I don't think they're done at receiver. I think they're going to get somebody at some point. I just don't know if it's going to come in the first round.
Guys, let me go back to one thing, and it's the reason I keep mentioning it. The fact that it's clearly not a one-year rebuild, and you could argue that they have no need at wide receiver or tight end right now. But you don't know what they're going to have next year. Again, I think, Sean, you just mentioned, they got to re-sign number 2 and number 3 after this year. And so when you look at a rebuild and the draft, I know I'm probably driving people nuts. Best player available. I don't care what position he plays. With every pick, with these first 4 picks, best player available. Get yourself 2 or 3 Pro Bowlers, and nobody's going to complain about what you do, regardless of what position they play.
I really like Quentin Johnston. I'm just sitting here listening to you guys, and I'm just like, it's certainly not a position of need in the first round. He's not the same caliber of player that Jamar Chase was. Don't take it wrong there. But I look back at like Cincinnati, like they had their quarterback in place in Joe Burrow, but they already had, they had spent a high pick on T. Higgins. They had Tyler Boyd. Like they had some receiving options. And if you remember looking at that draft, like everyone was talking about the offensive line. They needed to improve the offensive line. They saw a player like Jamar Chase, and they swooped in, and it's, just come up aces for them. Again, I'm not trying to say Quentin Johnston is that level of prospect, but what I'm saying is like the hitting on wide receiver in today's NFL can accelerate a rebuild really fast.
Guys, one of the reasons that I mentioned the Patriots earlier, Bill Belichick and I have had a relationship for 40 years. He's not my best friend. I'm not pretending that, we talk every day, but he is somebody that I know pretty well. And I just have the utmost respect for him. And if you go back and study drafts over the last 10, 15, 20 years, no team pays less attention to need in the draft than the New England Patriots. He's the one who taught me, you draft always the best player available. And I think everybody will agree that over the last 15, 20 years, the New England Patriots have been the best team in the NFL. So that kind of belief can work, and it does work. And I hope it's, how Ryan Poles feels about it. We also, it's so funny, guys, we've been looking a lot at where Poles comes from, the teams that he was with and what they do, and I think you have to feel good about having a relationship with a Super Bowl team, and how have they drafted, and what they have drafted has been offensive and defensive line first. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of these other draft experts are all over Poles is going to take an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. It's how he grew in the business, and it may be real and it may be right, but it is one other thing to consider if you're hell bent on being the one who figures out what the Bears are going to do with the first pick, or every pick for that matter.
Vince checking in. I think Vince. I'm just going to go with Vince here, so I don't butcher the last name there. Diana, I'm going to go with there. How about that? You're right on the money, Mr. Arkush. They are so bereft of talent. Trade down and draft the best player every time. Keep up the great work, guys. Vince, like I said, I think you're a first time on the show or first time commenter. At least thank you for joining in. Auger as well saying hit the like button, people. The YouTube AI demands it. Yes, the Google overlords say hit the like button. That helps us out. At the end of the day here, guys, we're going to hear from Ryan Poles next Tuesday. We're going to have a much better sample size and really finally, I feel like, know what the philosophy of the Bears organization is after next week.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got a second draft to measure it by.
I know that's very obvious to say, but
but to finish the sentence, yeah. but we'll also know how he did. And that's the most important part, is I keep saying he had a pretty good first draft. It wasn't the greatest draft ever, but I do like what they've got a bunch of players from that draft that haven't played yet. There's a bunch of kids that they are keeping that they hope will develop, and we don't know how good they're going to be. But I mean, just fixing, the safety position, the left tackle position, in the second and fifth round, those are good draft moves, and I think that they did. Well, they need another safety, but I mean, well, no, they don't. But the other kid's getting older.
If you can do that in a draft when you started with 5 picks, I mean, that's a win there. That's good.
And the thing is about trying to get a larger sample size to know what Ryan Poles likes is you look back at those 2 second-round picks or those 2 picks last year. I don't think any of us expected them to both be defensive backs either. So that was kind of a start right there of, whoa, like, is he going to be catching us off guard when we get to draft day?
It's one of the things I'm encouraged by, Kyle, because I think what he did was he took the best players available.
Yeah,
in his mind, and we have that to look off of, and that's why I keep holding out hope for Bijan Robinson, even though it's not going to happen. So,
although I will say this: if that's the philosophy, I do have some questions about how he arrived at Velus Jones Jr. as the best player available, but we don't have enough time to.
I have a simple answer for you on that one. Nobody gets them all right. There was something about him that he liked, and let's let that kid's career develop further before we decide to,
All right. Well, we're getting towards an hour here, guys. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. We are going to be back with you one more time next week after Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus meet the media, and then the Bears. We get to Thursday and we got 3 days of drafting, a lot of content coming your way at shawlocal.com. But guys, I'll start with Hub. Got any last words for us here as we head into these final days?
Not my last words are going to come. Is the draft start at 11 o'clock on Thursday morning next week? I think they'll come at 10:30 because these boards keep moving, and there are a couple players. I'll talk about them on the next one because I'm still working on them. But there are a couple players that I had never heard of that made it into my top 30 list yesterday because there is still information that we're getting and learning. I think that, let's just talk for 1 second about where the Chicago Bears are at, because there is so much going on. It's not just a draft. I think they've had a good free agency. I love the fact that they put themselves in the position of having the most cap space in free agency going in, and they still have some cap space to work with. I don't think they're going to be in trouble next year. They could be in trouble the year after if Justin Fields is the quarterback they want, because then they got to sign him. I'm sure you guys saw the Jalen Hurts deal, and that's where it all changes. And I don't want to say I'm confident, but I feel good about the way the stadium deal is moving. The new boss went to work on Monday, and so now we're going to start to see a lot more there. I think considering the fact that your favorite team was the worst team in the league last season, I like what they've done the last few months. They seem to be moving in a better direction. And as far as the draft, which is coming next week, we have to wait and see who they take or what their boards look like before we know. But I think Bears fans should feel good about the direction they're moving in right now, based on coming off a season where they were the worst team in the league, and they had the number one pick for the first team since the 1940s. And so it's a more enjoyable time, I think, for Bears fans, and I think that's probably good.
There's a lot to be excited about right now, and it's always exciting as we get towards the draft because there's just so many possibilities. And I think it's important to remember, like we were just saying with Velus Jones and the draft last year, they're not going to hit on every pick, but if you hit on 2 or 3 of those top 4 picks, that's a good draft for Ryan Poles. And certainly there's a lot of reasons to be excited. They have a lot of those high picks, 4 in the top, whatever it is, 61 or 64. It's an exciting time. And I think that Bears fans can, go into this week knowing that their team's going to get better.
All right, make sure you stick to shawlocal.com over the next week. We're going to have a lot of pre-draft content coming your way. And then, of course, throughout the draft. Outside of that, we will be back next week before the draft. We didn't get to a lot of comments today. We had a lot of discussion points. How about this, guys? We're going to confirm it. Not sure which day yet, but make sure you're following us on Twitter. We'll post it there. At @Hub_Arkush, at Sean_Hammond, at Kyle Nabors. We'll let you know when we're going to be live. But this will be the plan. That show right before the draft, we'll pretty much do a quick intro, and then we'll just open it up to questions. You can ask us about prospects. We'll just spend an hour with you guys trying to get let you guys pick our brains. Well, I'll be the host and let you guys pick Hub's and Sean's brain. If I try and dive too deep into the weeds on the prospects, I'm going to look dumb pretty quickly. I rely on Hub for that information there. But yeah, so it should be a good time next week, guys. Stick one more time at shawlocal.com. For Sean Hammond and Hub Arkush, I am Kyle Nabors. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we will talk to you guys later.